Well, I've driven the 150 miles from my house to Henrico, Virginia, next to the city of Richmond, to Universal Exports. Let's go see if we can find Stone and my. While we're waiting, here's a couple of beauties, or at least potential beauties. A trio. Okay, Stone, now you have finished the instrument cluster in my 63 W111, the Heckflosse.
That's correct.
And there it is, cradled in your loving arms. Tell me what you did.
So this one, I've made two into one essentially. A lot of things were a little tired on the old cluster. We've got a new clock spring with a new tube, which if we flip it, we can see it bounces up just a little bit. It's happy. We've rebuilt and replaced the trip meter and the odometer with new drive gears that are inside underneath here. We have a new magnetic pickup ring that sits inside here that spins the tube going up and down. The rheostat is existing. I know your old one didn't have a rheostat, but it was jumped over. Instead, I jumped over the rheostat inside of itself, so that way it's on full blast all the time. Maintain the same connector, but this time with better wiring that hasn't been repaired.
Yes.
Kept your bulbs all the way over, and then I kept your fascia so that way you still maintain the correct part number, and obviously new knobs and whatnot. But I mean, everything else that with a lot of cleaning. a lot of cleaning, a lot of time.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. It was a week-long process, but it was a good process.
And you say the clock's been in there running. The clock is keeping good time.
It's keeping good time. It's been in there running now for, gosh, since either late last night / early this morning, and it's still working perfectly.
Very good. And you say the problem was too much grease.
Too much grease. I also had to go to the actual points themselves where it pops back.
Yes.
And I had to burn the old grease off with my soldering iron. It was so caked on there. I scraped and scraped and scraped, but it was caked on there. And then the final drive spring was a little too stretched, so we have it just a little bit tighter now, so it actually picks up the pace and keeps it going, because at the very end it would want to die off and the clock would just want to stop pulsing. So we made it just a little tighter, so she may actually be running a little fast now, but it'll probably straighten itself out. It's starting to straighten itself out.
Wow. Oh, I love it. It's so quiet.
It is a very, very quiet clock. All you hear is when the contacts snap back, and that's the only sound it makes.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, the continuation of this video is probably going to be part 2.
Installation.
Is installation.
Well, we can pray that all of our power is up to snuff when you go and hook it back up, and that it doesn't for some reason decide to be right in between where the contacts are at. But if it is, just flip it over and give it a little tap and then plug it in.
Good advice. Just like you would do a wind-up clock.
It's just like a wind-up clock where you have to just kind of give it that little bit of movement. It's the same principle.
Yeah.
Just a Swiss clock inside there.
Very good. Well, it's the next day after coming back from Stone Blevin's place, and we're gonna reinstall the rebuilt instrument cluster in my 1963 220SE Heckflosse, as well as the clock. So that's where the clock goes, as well as the ashtray, which I had to take out. And over there is the hole where the instrument cluster goes, and of course I took out the temperature gauge and the oil pressure gauge. Try to show you. Here's the temperature gauge out, but the capillary tube is intact. The oil pressure gauge is out, and the tube going to the attachment to the oil filter housing is intact. And here's the hole it has to go back in. And I'll see if I can video the reverse process. Here's a better shot of the oil pressure gauge that has to go back in, and of the temperature gauge that needs to go back in. So I'll do the temperature gauge first. I know in past experience in taking these things out, I try to do the longer ones first, and then as the lengths get shorter, then we reattach those. So you can see I have to reattach this oil pressure speedometer cable, and then I have to plug it in to its electrics, and then it goes through this little stud back here in this instrument cluster. This stud right here goes through that hole in the dash, and there's a nifty little knob that my vehicle was missing, and I just happen to have this, and I retapped the threads to match this, and it fits fine. I'm not going to be able to tape this as I'm actually doing it, but I can show you the steps. So this is the temperature gauge side here, which I've removed screws that were in the base, and then I'm going to have to screw the temperature gauge in there, and I'll show you each step as I go along. I've got the instrument cluster kind of positioned. You can see everything's kind of positioned. There's a hole. I've got the plug through the dashboard down below here where it will connect, which you can't see because it's too dark, but we'll continue onward here. Well, I'm happy to report the temperature gauge is in. Let's see if you can see that. It's kind of fiddly. You got this screw right here after you wiggle this all in and get it in place. Then underneath this contact for the light bulb for the gauge, you have this other screw right here. And you leave these two screws intact because that just releases all this from the face of that gauge. So anyway, let's turn our attention to the oil pressure gauge now, which is right there, and it goes into this hole right there. Let me get things set up, and then I'll show you after the job is done. What a pain! But the oil pressure gauge is in. Temperature pressure gauge is in. All right. Continuing to work on putting this gauge back in. I got the speedometer cable back in, and that also operates the odometer and the trip meter. The next thing I want to do is push that stud into that hole and then seat the instrument cluster and then tighten the nut. Well, the instrument cluster is back in. I just have to tighten the nut in the back and hook up the oil line in the engine compartment, and then do the plug under the dash, and then put in the clock. So here's the male part of the plug. It just goes up into this female part right there. I don't know if you can see it, but that's where it goes. So let's just see something here. It goes right up in there, and I'll go ahead and plug it in. Yeah. Now, here's something I want to show you I did. These are your ventilation controls, and then, of course, in these W111 the Heckflosses, these were hard rubber. I replaced them with these chrome steel ones, which looks much nicer. And look what else I did. I put in a glove box light, operate off a toggle switch, which these cars never had. You reach in here and turn them off, and then at night you can't see these ventilation things, but now you can. They're backlit. It also helps me when I'm working back here in the dash if I want to. So that's just something I installed for my own convenience. And so let's go ahead and put in the clock and put back in this the clock ashtray. Is now hooked up. I can hear it ticking. Let's just put it back in its spot now. All you got to do is press onto these side pieces here and put it back in. That's in. And then we can put in the ashtray. You really should do this with two hands. Get it on a track here, push it in, and there you go. Turn off the behind the dash lights. Whoops, wrong switch. All right. So we'll just have to keep an eye on this clock. Close the dash up. And it's all done except for me getting under the car and hooking up the speedometer cable to the transmission. I reconnected the speedometer cable into the rear of the transmission. Tied it up. It's got a lot of, it's not tight, but then again, it's not flopping around. Now we'll let it off the lift and take it out and see if it's working. Working. It's registering right at 40, and compared to my GPS device down here, let's see, it's sitting right at 39. All right, probably going to leave that in for a while as I get used to this, but hey, that's not bad at all. I've got my speedometer and odometer back going. All my gauges are working. My only complaint is that the idiot lights were working before and now they're not, but I'm not going to pull all this stuff out. I might talk to Stone about that and just see, but I'm happy with the speedometer so far. Tomorrow I'm going to take a nice long trip, and then we're going to go to McDowell, get some maple syrup, because this is the area further south in the United States where maple syrup can be produced. So you can see we're sitting right at 40. Look at our digital down here. 40. Oh yeah, this is good. This is what I wanted. So I'm happy, all except for those idiot lights that aren't functioning.